Thank you, Sue. Good morning. It is a tremendous pleasure to be here. I calculate, I think it's been 4 years, possibly 5 since I last preached for UUC, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just trying to find my sermon. There we go. Okay. We heard the words, have you considered the possibility that everything you believe is wrong? Nothing like things as they really are? How different the world seems then. Federico Mormarco is asking if we are able to consider that there might be something different beyond our current reality. Can we imagine a completely different world? Last year, while enrolled in a program some of you may be familiar with, Beloved Conversations, Meditations on Race and Ethnicity from Meadville Lombard Theological School, there was a moment when I wondered if I had lost my ability to imagine, or whether it had atrophied, declining in effectiveness due to underuse or neglect. This happened when I was unable to fully respond to a journaling prompt asking me to imagine a future world without systemic racism. The prompt was asking for details, not generalities like equality, but how would everyday life be different? Buildings and economies and neighborhoods and leisure activities, how would everything be different, look different, smell different? And I couldn't do it. This bothered me, being unable to vividly imagine a future I'm committed to help create. I tried reviewing the additional resources for that segment and found a blog post by Adrienne Marie Brown in which she wrote, "What we are all up to, this changing the world willfully, is science fictional behavior, because all organizing is science fiction. We are creating a world we have never seen." I also began reading another resource from the list, Octavia's Brood, a collection of science fiction stories co-edited by Brown. I was only a few pages into that book when I suddenly remembered I loved science fiction as a kid. And I could imagine fantastical worlds different from mine when I was young. What happened? Why did I stop liking science fiction? Did my ability to imagine change? Is that possible? Then I remembered what I call the most fun class I took in seminary. It was taught by Dan McCannon, the Emerson Senior Lecturer at Harvard Divinity School, and it was titled Alternative Spiritualities in the United States. Part of the reason I took the class was that it was my last year and I hadn't had a class with Dan, who is a very popular UU professor. The other reason, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say it this way, but it is how I felt, was that I wanted to stop mentally rolling my eyes when people talked about certain supernatural beliefs. Not dry esoteric concepts like the Trinity that people have been yammering on about for centuries. No, my concern had to do with Christians around me who talk about heaven or hearing God as if it is really real for them. And groups like the UU Psi Symposium, that's PSI, the Greek letter, whose members explore the mystical and metaphysical, the psychic and intuitive, and the esoteric and paranormal as pathways to expansion of human consciousness and healing. I was okay with not sharing their interest, but I had come to realize that I sometimes thought of them as wrong, or less than, or other, because of their perception of reality. That was a problem for me, because it meant I might not be fully affirming or promoting the inherent dignity of every person, or equity in human relations, or acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, or a free search for truth and meaning. My judgment of them as wrong or less than or other for what they believed suggested that I wasn't on board with more than half of our 7 principles. So I took the class. It was a diverse group, both undergrads and graduate students from many different programs, only 3 of us Unitarian Universalists. We did an incredible amount of reading. Those Harvard people are ridiculous about that. I don't know when they sleep. And Dan chose a wonderful mix of materials. Looking back, the common thread I find in those readings was that the authors approached the diverse ideas they were writing about from a position of understanding rather than skepticism. I'm not saying that they endorsed the ideas, but they endeavored to understand how the beliefs originated, why they flourished, and why the people who introduced them and those who were drawn to them felt their lives were better after embracing what were often seen as radical, even fantastical beliefs. And we were among those groups in past centuries. Our Unitarian grandparents and Universalist grandparents. But we Unitarian Universalists study our ancestors from a position of belonging now. Their past oddities, old Ralph Waldo and his giant eye, and those Universalist spiritualists who had lengthy and regular conversation with those who had died, don't bother our current realities. Maybe because we almost never talk about them. Over the course of the semester, I realized how much I was learning when I began to understand how Joseph Smith's angel and golden tablets were believable in the place and time and circumstances in which he started what is now Mormonism. And the same for Christian Science, the Course in Miracles, Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, Goethe and his belief in the inner reality of animals and plants, and many more. And we had field trips, a long list we could choose from. Some were local and brief, some were further away and took a whole day. One was even an entire weekend. Near the end of the semester, a few of us spent a Saturday at the Sirius community, an intentional community in Shutesbury, Massachusetts, grounded in spiritual exploration and dedicated to practicing permaculture farming. We helped with chores in the morning. I worked preparing vegetable plots for winter. We meditated with the residents and other visitors, shared a meal, and took a tour of the community. Our final stop was the Sacred Stone Circle, a group of stone monoliths, each pointing to a sacred site somewhere in the world. We were asked to take our time, pausing in front of each stone, and then remain in front of the one which seemed to connect to us. This would have provoked mental, if not actual, eye rolling from me 3 months earlier. Now I approached it thoughtfully. To my amazement, I found 2 stones where I felt some altered sense of being present. Then I stood in front of my stone. It is hard to describe exactly what I felt. The best I can do is say that a vibration seemed to fill my body. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. I remember it as vividly as if it occurred this morning. What was that feeling? Was it my imagination? Had weeks of learning about spiritualities outside of the mainstream conditioned me to feel something? Or had it opened me to feel something? I didn't explore it further at the time. I had finals and papers to do. But earlier this year, as I was Googling about imagination and religion, I ran across a name I remembered from the reading list in that class. Tanya Marie Luhrmann is an anthropology professor at Stanford University. One of her specializations is religion. Her most recent book is How God Becomes Real, Kindling the Presence of Invisible Others. Her website summarizes the book as about the hard work required to make God real, how it changes the people who do it, and why it helps explain the enduring power of faith. She writes, I use my training in psychological anthropology to understand how people know what is real. I don't pass judgment on whether they are right. Instead, I ask, what leads people to make the judgment that God was present? What do they perceive that makes them more confident or more uncertain? I read more of her writing, and I was fascinated by her work on the role of absorption in spiritual experience. In this context, absorption is the broader name for the mental capacity common to trance, hypnosis, dissociation, and much of spiritual experience, but also to most imaginative experience, in which the individual becomes caught up in ideas or images or fascinations. It is the capacity to become focused on an object which one sees or imagines around them without having an income in mind, and to allow that focus to increase while one's attention to everyday distractions of normal life diminishes. Some of her work has been with evangelical Christians, looking at what is involved when they perceive that they hear God. Her ethnographic research is based on a theory that learning to experience God depends on three things. One, interpretation, using socially and culturally taught categories that identify the presence of God. Two, practice, the consequences of training endorsed by the religion, such as prayer. And three, proclivity, a talent for and willingness to respond to practice. I get the interpretation part. We all experience life, at least partly, based on what we have been taught to expect. The practice part makes sense to me. The more we do something, the more it becomes part of normal for us. It is the proclivity part, especially the idea of having a talent for absorption, that engages my question about what happened with that monolith stone. Her research found a wide range of proficiency in praying among members of the communities she studied. Everyone was exposed to the same ideas. Everyone had equal practice, but those who became good prayers, to use her terminology, all reported mental experiences which were very similar to each other, while those who were not considered good prayers, including by themselves, reported different mental experiences. She and her team also evaluated everyone with the Intelligent Absorption Scale, which was first developed in the 1970s and is considered the gold standard for studying hypnotism. People who have high absorption scores have greater imagery abilities and are easier to hypnotize. It is often used in studying the role of imagination in people's lives. The scale is not designed to measure any form of religiosity. There is only one question on the scale which might connect to religion, and it does not use language which most people would identify as spiritual or religious. Lerman and her team compared the ethnographic data they coded from their interviews with the participants' intelligence scores and found a strong relationship between a proclivity for absorption and the vividness of individuals' mental imagery about God. Lerman asserts that the ability to experience as real what must be imagined is at the heart of religion. Is that true? Even of us rational-ish Unitarian Universalists? I would be challenged to identify a single sermon I've given in the past 2 years that did not focus at some point on the interdependent web of all existence. It has become the foundation of my theology. And yet some would not consider it real. in a conventional sense. What if Lerman's research results hold true in future studies? After accounting for what we are taught by our society and culture, and how much we do or do not practice the rituals of a particular faith, what if the deciding factor in our understanding of the reality and presence of God is whether some brains more easily become absorbed in focusing on an object, especially an idea or concept which is not physically real? What if the primary reason for differences between myself and some of my own relatives in whether and how we perceive God as a supernatural being is not because my rational brain or moral development is more advanced than theirs, but because our proclivity for absorption is different? If it is inherently easier for them to believe in something they cannot touch with their skin, see with their eyes, or hear with their ears, why does it matter? In one of my MFC essays, I wrote about an epiphany I had while working with evangelical Christian colleagues in hospital chaplaincy. One day, it suddenly occurred to me that if I merely substituted the term interdependent web of all existence for the word God, I could find a way to agree with many of their statements which I had previously reacted negatively to. We didn't disagree about relationships with one another, about how we should care for others or have responsibility for the world around us. We just didn't have a common understanding of where it all started and who or what is in charge. I did not share this revelation with those colleagues, but it made me more comfortable interacting with them, easier to talk with them about our common goals. Maybe if we more often try to know people whom we interact with, whose beliefs are hard for us to understand, as different rather than wrong, maybe we will see a different world. In closing, I invite you to respond to yourself or someone else, now or later, to this meditation by Sean Parker Dennison entitled, Can You Believe? Can you believe in a world where no one is turned away for being wrong? Can you believe in a world where mistakes are simply ways of learning? Can you believe in a place where you can feel the lightness of not knowing? Can you believe there is room enough at the table for you and for the one you call enemy? Can you believe in the improvisational nature of mystery and irrational compassion? Can you believe that training you to be a devil's advocate was a way of stealing your tenderness? Can you believe that you can get your tenderness back and become a chief collaborator with love? It is a blessing to worship with you today. May the days ahead be filled with hope, joy, and vivid imagination. May it be so, and amen.